right, my name is Dr. Katindi Sivi. I do research and policy analysis and foresight work. So part of what I've been involved in is youth research across Africa, and mainly looking at the future of Africa and Kenya as well, in terms of what it portends, looking at the question of the youth bulge issues. I think one of the interesting things to think about is, first of all, what is violence and what violence are they involved in and at what levels? Because I think it doesn't happen at once, it is not all the same. So I think one of the things that I have seen is that a lot of young people are coming from very violent homes. And part of it is frustration by parents because of poverty. And so they grow up thinking that the only way they can resolve issues is through conflict. But as they grow up, then there are issues around their own frustration. And because there's no outlet, for example, institutions that allow them to, review those issues and address them in a healthy way, then they resort to take matters into their own hands. If you look at security agencies as well, the way they respond to young people is also by being very violent towards them. And so because of that, young people have also learned how to retaliate. Think about in group settings where young people also have the mob psychology. And so peer influence, for example, in campuses and things like that, when they need to raise issues, again correlated with the lack of institutions not having adequate mechanisms for them to channel out their grievances, and when they do, those grievances are not addressed. So they result to peer violence and peer influence. But then moving on, systems of violence like political structures during elections and so forth. Remember that we have, first of all, very many young people who are not all very well educated. And so, and when these opportunities show up, for example, during elections, what happens is that they are easily mobilized by politicians and paid off to be able to, instigate violence. So if you think about how much it costs, for example, to mobilize young people, a study has been done actually and documented that it costs as little as 50 bob to disrupt a meeting. It costs as little as 300 shillings to kill, and to do the more extreme, forms of violence. And so if it costs so little to do such atrocious things, violence seems like it pays, right? And so young people are so mainly, and they take up these things because of, I said, peer pressure, but also because they are unemployed. So they have a lot of time in their hands. A lot of them also are under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And so that also impairs their own judgment about how they're going to, what is the right decision to make. The thing about youth programs is that they are designed with the objective of providing employment. Now, that is relative because in the mind of young people, employment needs to be gainful. It needs to be able to set you off on a trajectory of success, right? But the way these programs are designed is to give you something basic to do and keep you busy. So that two are not incongruent, right? The two objectives and expectations are not incongruent. And so because of that, young people become frustrated, right? And then because the objectives of the project is to provide employment, it doesn't speak anything about deterring violence. And so because of that, they are not adequate in doing so. But by extension, they do, by getting some young people into these programs, you have less numbers that are able to be mobilized for violence, right? And so it's maybe an indirect correlation rather than a direct correlation. When you think about the peace programs that have been done, for example, they are still empowerment programs in one way or another. They do speak about violence directly. And so, but you see, the problem with those is that they are not connected to the issues why young people are being violent. So if I'm a young person who is violent because I'm frustrated because of unemployment, but you bring a peace program which doesn't address my issue of unemployment, then yes, you can talk to me about how being violent is bad and how I need to be able to live in a peaceful community, but you haven't addressed the root cause of the problem. One of the interesting programs, though, is the Kenya Youth Empowerment Opportunities Program. And what that program has done is interesting because they began to put in a training around the soft issues in Kenya, or rather soft issue, addressing, yes, the technical issues that a young person needs to train up for to get a job. But they incorporated in that issues around, peaceful coexistence or other soft issues that young people need to. And apparently that has really been lauded as the most important component, because these life skills are not really ingrained, whether it's in school, whether sometimes it's at home. And so young people sometimes don't know how to be able to effectively cope in a public setting. So it looks like a lot of that needs to be done, and it looks like part of empowerment has to be self-awareness, because personal decision making contributes a lot to why a young person should choose violence in the first place. I think I need to speak to an interesting issue that's happening, of course, which is extremist violence and terrorism. And the fact that, so I once did a project in northern Kenya, and I was asking young people, so what do you think the future of Kenya is? And they said, if Somalia was peaceful, we would actually secede and be part of Somalia. And I asked why. They said, the problem with these programs that counter extremist violence is that they paint the picture as if it's negative, right? So it's said terrorism is bad. But the narrative that the other side is using is that, look, when government doesn't give you essential services like IDs, we welcome you. Because on one hand, you're being denied the right to belong, and you're so using the ID, but they're saying, come, we give you an identity. Come, we give you a cause to die for. That sounds very sexy, right? Come, let's give you brotherhood, and by extension, sisterhood. And in fact, there is a long-term promise. When you die in this cause, we will give you 7 virgins. Now, I think for every young man, that's very attractive, right? And so the point, I think, for me, the counter narrative to that is you need a program that promises similar things: hope, identity, camaraderie, and a purpose in your empowerment programs, so that you can then be able to flip that attraction to extremist violence. You see, but our programs don't do that. They don't give you hope. They don't give you all those things that I listed. And I think they are short in that because someone else is filling that gap. And one young man said to me, I actually came from across the border the other week, and I came to bury my cousin who died in the struggle. And I said, so why would you go back? Because you would be the next. And they said, I'd rather live a short, meaningful life than a long life with nothing to write home about my life. And I realized that young people are interested in impact. They're interested in something that makes a difference in their lives. But those empowerment programs are not designed like that. And I think for me, what I came to a realization of is that programming of young people is counterproductive. If you think about, and I'm not in any way praising the terrorist movement, I'm just saying they don't program anything. They just give you the template and tell you this is what you're in for. And as bad as the reality is, people are enrolling. It's because there's something deeper to it that addresses the core need of a young person. And I feel like that's what the empowerment programs need to do. Actually, the other one is what you have referred to as targeting, but I look at targeting differently. It's being published in a book, but I wrote a paper on the Women's Enterprise Fund. And is it really? It's actually called Targeting of Targeting Funds. The reason for that is that we've set aside this special fund, so like for young people to empower them and for women and others. But when you do a disaggregation of that data, what you realize is that it doesn't disaggregate beyond region and beyond just holistically talking about youth or women, etc. And so if you really want to look for who need this money the most, it's obviously the much more marginalized counties, it is obviously youth with disability, it is youth from poor households, but that disaggregation is not there. And so when you actually do the analysis, you find that as much as we have set aside the funds for these groups, they will always benefit the advantaged group. It's the people who know how to do the application, so it's the well-educated, it's the people who, for example, in some of the most empowered counties. And so I don't have anything against, that's what the data was saying, is that, for example, Nyeri County got 5, I think, times more than it should. And other counties were getting 0.5%. They benefited, the Nyeri County, for example, benefited about 50% of the women they could have in the years that they have been in existence, while the ones that were getting the 0.3% of what they should have gotten, had there been targeting in terms of poverty, disaggregating the data by even levels of disability, levels of poverty, so that you get the percentages of how much money should go to a particular county. When you ask the question about why did you give this county that's already so well, advantaged much more, they say the other counties don't have the capacity. But that's the reason why you set up the fund, to get the capacity, to raise the capacity of these other people. But you see, you're still disadvantaging them. So for me, the issue then becomes targeting of targeted funds to make sure that empowerment is really, and that has to come with very good data, disaggregated to the ward level, to the individual, even village level, so that, and being very deliberate about knocking on doors to look for who are these people who are doing that. So when you tell people come and apply, that already cuts the people who need it the most. But like Wings to Fly, we'll actually go to ask the village headman, or usually they are men, so asking them who needs help. Of course, if there's a corruption, but the village knows who really needs help. And if you go to those places and invest those resources there and empower those people, maybe you will need it. And usually, actually, the most disadvantaged needs the least resources to be able to get to a level that they can start competing with others. So you won't lose. It's a little more work, but you won't lose much by doing that. And I think that's what also needs to happen. We also don't have a complete database of who are the young people in Kenya, what jobs do they need. So you also have serial workshop attendees, and resource and those ones who are getting the loans and everything. So again, you recycle the ones who benefited. We are double counting beneficiaries and really people. So I did another study and I was looking at inequality in Kenya, and it actually occurred that if you're born in Turkana, in a place called Kotaluklo Bay, you have about maybe 72% chances of not having a secondary education. If you come from a female-headed household, that percentage grows by, that unlikelihood grows by to 120%. So what are we doing? It means that those resources need to go to that person there who, even by virtue of where they are born, has such few chances of being able to get those resources. And for me, that's what targeting is about. You see, it depends on what we are saying improved. When I was in Vision 2030, by the virtue of my research work, one gentleman there said to me, patia huyu msichana kazi ya kuandika maneno ya youth, because I was the youngest in the group. And then I, idealistic, so you say things around affirmative action. Youth should be, this is what should happen. And he says, msichana, kazi ya vijana, patia sports and music and art. What did that communicate to me? That the intention is to have it on paper. The issue about transformation was secondary. Okay? And for me, it's not to bash Vision 2030. I mean, it has given us a roadmap about where we want to go in the country. But the point is that what is the spirit of some of this programming? Now, if our intention is to give young people rudimentary skills when the world is moving into IT, high-tech skills, then are we really talking about a future where our young people can engage? So meaningfully, not just in Kenya, but in the world. So we are also saying that young people are global citizens. But if we are giving them rudimentary technical skills, to what extent? Yes, so we can put it in our books that we have benefited young people. We have trained 10,000. But in essence, what is the transformation we have given young people? And one of the things that I have come alive to is that there's a gap between what young people expect and what we are giving them through policy. So in Kazi Mtaani, I think if you pay about how much per day? 300 or somewhere. Yes. But it's not 1,000 bob per day. It's not 1,000 bob per day. So if you do that, a young person is expecting. If you ask a young person, if I was getting 100,000 shillings now, and you're giving them 500, and not, the vision is so different. And so the point I'm making is, of course, young people need to work hard. Their idealism is also something that needs to be addressed. But at the end of the day, there's a disconnect. And we are busy. There is all manner of youth programs. I still question their effectiveness. I still question, in real terms, in terms of transformation. Just look at the Asian Tigers. What they did during their youth bulge is invest in education. And some countries did free education from early childhood to campus. Those people, you don't need to have an empowerment program for them, because you have equipped them to look for their own jobs. You and I looked for our own jobs because of those education opportunities we got. And so I think we are prescribing, you see, for me, government is supposed to be an enabler. Okay? And when we then begin to do programming, we lose the plot. And so if you get this young person who is functionally illiterate means you can read and write. But that education, can it make you think about a solution? Because employment is about creating solutions for needs in the society. If that person cannot do that, we have failed. And so we have a lot of youth programs. We can tick the boxes in terms of the numbers we have trained, but is there transformation so that these young people are self-perpetuating to get their own opportunities and to transform others and create pathways for others? For me, that's what I'm looking at, and I don't think we are yet. In any program that we have done, I wonder whether we are there.